Won't you be my neighbor, DNA? Kate Wilson here with another episode of All Access DNA. Today we are talking with my actual neighbor, Stephen Crane, who was born with a condition called spina bifida, which typically refers to an opening along the spine and neural tube. Stephen talks about growing up with a disability and often being a patient zero for providers as he has overlapping conditions. He shares his inspiration for writing his book, I Can Appreciate That, a memoir that delves into replacing the negative space with the hidden blessings of challenge. A note for the listener. We talk about possible causes of spina bifida, but don't go into details. Some risk factors can include too little folate during pregnancy, which is why folic acid is recommended, or a family history of neural tube defects, which we discuss may be Stephen's case. Currently, there's no clear pattern of inheritance for spina bifida, so while it may be showing up in one way for Stephen's family, it doesn't fit in others. There's more information about spina bifida in the show notes. Let's get started. Hi, Stephen. Welcome to All Access DNA. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're a writer and a storyteller. Let's start your story with some background info. You were born with a condition called spina bifida, and I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about spina bifida and what you remember from growing up with that diagnosis.
Sure, I'll do what I can. This was an excellent opportunity to go back in and ask some of those questions of my parents because obviously from birth you have no recollection of your own. So
Right.
spina bifida is a birth defect, which is essentially at birth there is a portion of the spine or spinal sac that is exposed outside the body. And when you are born, immediately you have to have a surgery to close that. And so they make an incision in your spine and they they place the sac back inside your body and close it. And the result of that is almost always some degree of not paralysis.
Mm.
I'm not sure what the word is that I'm looking for
Like
there.
maybe like motor or neural, I don't know, challenges or like disconnect maybe?
Yeah, there's always some degree of damage, essentially nerve damage from the point of closure down. And so in my instance, I actually am pretty blessed that I have a fairly mild version of spina bifida. In my case, I have decreased sensation from the middle of my spine down, and it's really sort of worse as you go from the knees to the feet, and less musculature. Think the doctors told my parents that there are like 26 muscles in the feet and that I had like half of them that functioned properly. So
Okay.
you're kind of dealing with the short deck from there on in terms of how you function, how you move, how you're able to do certain things. But again, I'm fortunate because I have a fairly mild version of that. There are a lot of people with spina bifida who have much more significant challenges. A lot of people never walk. A lot of those people are unable to have children. I'm blessed to have two beautiful children who are grown at this point and are healthy. Spina bifida apparently is carried on, I believe, in the mother's genealogy more so in the father's. And so it was on my mother's side, and I have a cousin who also has a very mild version of it as well. Hers is even less mild or more mild than mine, and she has relatively fewer challenges. But so it runs in our family. And my children were not at risk so much for having that gene as well. But if my sister had had children, they would have been at greater risk.
And what I will say with spina bifida is it's one of those conditions where, you know, as a genetic counselor, we learned it was multifactorial. So there's some that might have more of a genetic cause, some that may have more of like an environmental cause, some that we never really know why it happens, and then for your example, some that may run in a family. And those ones that go in the family, sometimes we can see them potentially following like the sex chromosomes, like you mentioned, like an XX versus an XY, but there are also some that don't quite follow that pattern. So I think with spina bifida, what's hard sometimes is to know the exact cause because sometimes it's something that we can test for and find, and sometimes it isn't.
Well, and
And so I'll include some.
that was certainly the case in my instance where
Mhm.
it was a surprise to I was born in 1972. and the world is a very different place now. Then there was no testing pre-birth to identify that, and so it was like, surprise, your child has spina bifida. And my parents had no way of knowing that in advance, no way to prepare for it or to
Right.
learn about it or whatever. And so it was sort of day one, well, your child's having a surgery and it's not going to be, their life, if they survive that
Yeah.
surgery, their life is not going to be maybe what you expected. And so good luck. And so,
My goodness.
I don't know to what degree that's different now. I mean, I'm sure that there have to be some advancements in that regard, that there are prenatal screenings and identifiers.
Yeah, there definitely are. So a lot of times with like ultrasounds, ultrasounds are definitely much better these days, and most everybody has some type of ultrasound. The other is there is some blood work that can be done on the mom, and that it has basically some protein, some info from the baby in there, and if there are certain markers that are elevated, then doctors get suspicious about spina bifida, and so then they may ask for like a more detailed ultrasound. So there are those types of options. I'm curious because like you said, you're born with this. It kind of is what it is. You grew up as you are. Did you have to go back and like chat with your parents to talk about like some of the childhood portions too? Because also I think a lot of us don't necessarily remember things from when we're 3, 4, or 5 years old. And what did your parents remember? Especially like if they shared anything about those early days, because they were probably pretty blindsided by the information.
Yeah, we didn't talk too much about like the time between like when I started to remember things and between my birth and when I started to have memories of my own. But I'm sure that there were an endless string of challenges and unexpected, instances where they just sort of had to learn on the fly and sort of figure it out. And to a certain degree, that's sort of been my I'm 53 now, and I am still on different levels, spina bifida being one of them, but on different levels, I'm still sort of a mystery to doctors. And so I've had a whole lifetime of sort of practicing, learning on the fly, and not really knowing exactly what to do about a diagnosis or a condition. From what I will say is that my parents are amazing. My parents are still with us, thank God, and they're super healthy. My entire life, they have been a foundation of support. From my earliest memories, what my parents always told me was that I was different, and that is neither better nor worse than anyone else.
Mhm.
I'm just different. My body works differently. My body will be different. It is now and it will always be different than other people's. And that was the basic understanding when I was like 5, right? And kids don't understand that. Kids don't understand a lot, and kids can be mean, and that's its own challenge when you're like that kid, when you're the kid who is going to school in a wheelchair, or has it spends half of school year in the hospital or whatever. Kids don't understand that, and so that becomes a different thing. But my parents always told me that your body works differently, but your brain also works differently, and you may not be able to do some of the things physically that other people can do, but you have other talents that more than make up for that. And so you have to go about things differently and solve problems differently than other people might, and you're probably going to land in different places and find different solutions. And so I've sort of grown up with that mindset my whole life, which has served me well.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they were very supportive, but also kind of trying to say, well, again, this is what's going on, so let's talk about it. Let's figure things out. Let's, like you said, think about what are our strengths and areas to maybe look into, or things that I mean, you're a kid, so you're just trying to figure out what you're interested in, what you want to do, those types of things.
Yes, yeah, very supportive, and that continues to this day.
How was it being like a teenager, I guess, because as you said, that can just be a challenging time regardless of anything. So how was that growing up and kind of coming from trying to kind of find your own way in the world, or establish more of a sense of independence?
Well, so again, it was a different time back in the 70s and 80s, and the school that I went to, somehow we didn't have middle school. We had K through 7, and then we had 8 through 12. And we didn't I we didn't move during my childhood, so I went to school with the same kids from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade for the most part. Sometimes that can be good, and sometimes that can really stink because, like, if you're the weird kid for any reason, like in kindergarten or 1st grade, you get cemented as that. And so that is who you are until you're not with those people anymore, right? So like in 12th grade, I'm still the weird kid even though I've evolved and maybe become a different person, or, but so as a teenager, it was super challenging to be the different kid, to be the ostracized kid who people still didn't understand, and, teenagers do different things with not understanding. You get into bullying and, all that stuff. But what also happens is that you find people who actually like you despite those things and for other reasons and for who you actually are as a person, as opposed to what you look like or what you're able to do or whatever, the more superficial things. And so I will say that I have, again, blessed to have, like, amongst my support system, I still have some of my best friends from that day and age, from, way back in high school and middle school, even, who I'm still, really close friends with today, who have known me all along and have knew me then, know me now. And, those things were not they were part of the relationship, but there was like a understanding and like an okayness with all of that, was life saving. To have a few people who like didn't care, you know, enough to actually get to know you.
Well, yeah, right, and got to know you as a person and connected with you as a person, right? And so
Right. Yeah, I guess
the
the other
rest of
thing that
it's
I
just
would
not as important.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I would add there is that, I mean, I grew up here in Atlanta, and so I've had a relationship with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, CHOA, Eggleston Hospital, Scottish Rite, from my earliest memories. I mean, I went there most years, for one thing or another, had tons of surgeries, spent major portions of different grades there. Just so I always grew up with like this massive appreciation for that institution in particular, children's healthcare in a general sense. But it's still an organization that I'm, super fond of and support when I can. And, there's a community and an affinity there that never leaves you.
Well, and that was gonna be my next question was just what were some of the treatments or, management kind of conversations, that you had? Because you talked about having surgery fairly soon after birth, and it sounds like there were additional surgeries. What other types of treatment did you go through growing up?
Well, so spina bifida results in a variety of different complications. And I guess some of those are probably similar across various people, and some of them may be unique. In my instance,
Mhm.
the lack of sensation and lack of musculature in my lower extremities resulted in a number of surgeries. And I don't have really any feeling in my feet. And so when I was probably, I don't know, 12 or so, I was doing maybe the dumbest thing I could do, which was walking around barefoot outside, and I stepped on a stone and I didn't even realize it. And it cut my foot and it actually embedded into my foot. And it like a pearl. I mean, this rock like went inside my foot and like became a pearl inside my foot, which I didn't even realize. I know, right? Your face is the correct reaction to that, but I didn't even realize it. And then, like, one day I was laying down on my stomach watching TV, and my parents were on the couch behind me. And my mom said, "What's on your foot?" And I said, "I don't know." And she looked at it, and I had like this sore on my foot, and this small little stone had
Oh my
embedded
gosh.
itself in my foot to the point where it gave me a bone infection. And so and bone infections are like cancer. Really, the only way to get rid of them is to cut them out. And so
Yeah.
um, that's actually the second bone infection that I had when I was probably 5 or so. I had a plate implanted between the bones in my left leg to sort of help turn my leg because my foot was turned inward from birth, and I had braces and all that stuff to help sort of correct that, and it didn't really work. So they did a surgery, put a plate in there and moved it. And that helped move the angle of my foot, but I got a bone infection from that. So I got a
From
bone
that, okay.
infection at 5, and my parents, to your earlier question about, what my parents remember that I don't, in that instance, they ran every course of antibiotics that they could think of, and they were down to like the very last one that was on the shelf. And they're like, if this doesn't work, we don't know what we're going to do. And thank God that one worked. And so that cleared up. But then in the instance of the other one, when I was 12 or 13 or so, that created a bone infection in the heel bone in my right foot, where I had to have like a half inch of my right heel cut off to get rid of the bone infection, which the result of that is now you are magically a half inch shorter on one side than on the other. And so for the rest of your life, you are dealing with orthopedic shoes and lifts and inserts and, all of that stuff. So, and that's just the legs part of it. There are other surgeries that were urological in nature. Essentially, was born without a functioning bladder, and had to have an ileostomy from birth up until age 17. And then at 17, they had created, when I was 17, in the late 80s, they had created a brand new procedure called an Indiana reservoir, which is essentially creating an artificial bladder out of small bowel tissue. And I was one of the very first patients to ever have that surgery. Highly speculative at the time. It was sort of investigative. And they're like, we're pretty sure this works. And
That's what you want to hear.
right? And but it was one of those things. I mean, I was 17. I had that childhood that we just discussed. I was desperate for something that might like give me a shot at normalcy, at what I perceived to be normalcy. And I could see college on the horizon and all those things. Like,
Hmm.
if I have this surgery and I literally move to a place where nobody knows me, I could start over and I could actually like have a whole different life. And that happened. I mean, I was terrified to have that surgery. I actually called my parents the night before, from the hospital bed, crying, saying, "I don't think I can do it. I'm so scared. I can't do it."
Yeah.
And my parents talked me off the ledge, and they're like, "Remember why you wanted to do this. We'll support you either way, but just think it through and remember why you wanted to do this, and what." And I ended up having the surgery, and I did move away to a place where nobody knew me, and I changed. In my childhood, I was Steve, and when I would start college, I became Steven, and literally I
Hmm.
think of my life in like different segments, and it's like birth to
Really?
18, and then 18 to marriage probably, and then but yeah, I literally
So
became
having that
a
surgery was
different
like
person.
a very defining kind of moment for you,
Life
like a
changing.
milestone. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, you talk about some of the other things that you have going on, maybe related to spina bifida, maybe in addition to spina bifida. One of the things we've talked about is the like neuropathy, and I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that and how, if at all, does it relate to spina bifida?
I'm told that it doesn't really relate, that
Hmm.
that they're not, one doesn't cause the other, and one isn't really necessarily affected by the other. They're essentially two different spinal disorders. And
Okay.
lucky me, I just happen to have
You
both
have
of them.
both.
Yes, along with arthritis. And so
Interesting.
there's all kinds of different things which becomes its
Mhm.
own. I'd already had enough conversations with doctors that went something like me telling them what's happening and then going, "Yeah, we don't really know what to do about that." But then when you have spina bifida on top of neuropathy, on top of arthritis, and you try to tell a doctor where things hurt, and you can't unravel that plate of spaghetti, and you can't really all you know is that you hurt, and you can't
Right.
really identify exactly where or exactly what's causing it or what makes it better or worse. you're a real joy to treat. Doctors don't really know what to do with that, and so it's a frustrating
Yeah.
endeavor for everyone.
Did it you ever get to a point where you're just, like, pissed off and you're like, "I'm done with why are there so many of these things and why am I
I,
facing?"
uh, I live a little bit like that every day, all the time for my whole life. It's a roller coaster. There are times when you are less like that and, less but my default is super cynical. I try, but I'm sort of by default, I'm the glass half empty kind of guy, who does sort of fixate on, why does it have to be like this? Why was I born like this? Why can't I catch a break? Why does this have to happen to me? I fall into that trap pretty often. But that mindset actually strangely birthed the book, which this was during COVID, right at the onset of COVID. I was having a conversation with my oldest son, who is now 20, and I think at the time he was 14 or 15. And we were just having, a basic parent-child conversation. I don't even remember what he said to me, but I said something back to him, and his response to me was, "Dang, why do you always have to be so negative about everything?" And a lot of times when kids say stuff to you, you can just be like, "Well, because I said so, I'm the parent, whatever," and you can kind of blow it off. But like in that moment, it was so convicting, and he was so right that I couldn't, he wasn't wrong about that. I am super negative, way too often. And I did not know the answer to his question. I don't know why I had to be like that. And so my day job is being a contract freelance writer. And during COVID, a lot of that business just sort of dried up as people were trying to figure out what was going to happen, what was going to happen next, and who they needed for what. And so a lot of my business went away. And so suddenly found myself with a lot of free time and like this giant question from my child. And so I spent a year thinking about that, meditating on it, researching, praying, whatever. And the result of that was a book called I Can Appreciate That, which essentially is a series of autobiographical essays that goes back and looks at the most challenging times in my life, whether it's the surgeries, the birth defects, losing my sister to cancer, big stuff like that, or things like, job changes or, foster care, whatever it is, different things that we're involved in, my search for, spirituality and, a home church and all that stuff. So it covers a variety of things, but the theme in all of that is looking at the quote unquote worst things that ever happened to me and looking at them more closely and realizing that there are these massive blessings hiding inside of every one of those challenges and that there are things to literally appreciate about even the worst circumstances in your life.
Wow. Yeah, and we'll put a link to the book in the show notes, but I'm so impressed that you have this realization talking to your son, and instead of brushing it off or getting more mad because maybe it feels true, you're kind of curious and we're like, "What's going on there? Let me dig deeper into it."
I've written 2 books. The first one I really, really wanted to write and isn't very good,
Mhm.
but the second one I didn't even wanna write. I Can Appreciate That. I was like, "Oh my gosh," and it was a labor of love and frustration, and I'm super proud of it, and I'm super grateful for it because it was so therapeutic to, like, have to go through all of that stuff and unwind all of it, figure out why certain things had happened, look back at things, and like the blessings that have come out of that book are amazing in terms of my own relationships, other people's relationships, people I don't even know who reached out to me and said, this helped me profoundly. The coolest thing that came out of that was like this idea of community, especially coming out of COVID when everybody was like so siloed and separated, whatever. The most affirming thing that comes out of something like that from sharing our experiences, particularly our challenging experiences, is when other people say, me too. That not the thing that happened to you didn't exactly happen to me, but I sympathize with that, I empathize with that, I understand that, and I I either learned something from your experience or I think differently about that now, or what just the whole Me Too aspect of, like, recognizing other people's your own challenges in other people's experiences and learning from each other is, like, I'd never had that experience before, and so, I mean, that book sort of got it fell out of me or got pulled out of me by something other than it wasn't. I mean, I wrote it, but it something else helped.
Yeah. 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 It's amazing too, like how that can happen in the creative process. And then, I think do you give all the proceeds now to like your son? Is he the main
He
breadwinner
wishes.
from the book?
Well, no, not to him, but I should actually give him probably co-ownership of it. But what we do is one of the chapters in that book is about cancer, losing my sister to cancer, and then also some other very close people to me who have passed from cancer, and some people who didn't pass, which to that. But one of the people who did pass was this child named Lake Bosman, and he was about the same age as my youngest son and played baseball in the same league and all of that. He passed away at the age of 12, and it was profoundly impactful to me. And it sort of echoed some of the experiences that I had with my sister. And even though I didn't have like this deep relationship with this child, his experience and his family's experience taught me so many things and helped me understand so many things that I didn't really understand in real time when I was having that experience of losing my sister. So every copy of that book that we sell generates a donation to a fund in his name at Cure Childhood Cancer. And sadly, we just missed September, but September is Childhood Cancer Month, and so we give 100% of the proceeds of that book every September to cure child cancer.
Okay. Well, we'll put a mention of that too with Cure Childhood Cancer as well, because I
Great
know that's a very
organization.
important
Love
cause.
them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to go back to something you kind of had talked about or touched on, which is some of the surgery, so the treatment you've had where you've had physicians who have said, "We think this will work," or "We're not really sure. This is something new," right? And so sometimes it's like being that patient zero, the first person ever either having these conditions diagnosed in the same person or having this new treatment that they've come up with. What has your experience been being a patient zero? Because it sounds like you've been in that position a few times.
Yeah, sadly more than once. And I'll tell you, so it's probably like any number of things. When you're 17 and you're going to be like a trailblazer and like one of the first people to do something, even if it's in something like as undesired as like a major surgery, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And you wear it as a badge of honor and you're like, I'm the first, and whatever. And I can tell you 35 years later, it's a lot less cool. It's a lot more frustrating to
Yeah.
still be the kind of person who the doctors look at and go, yeah, we haven't really seen that combination of things before. I was having a conversation with a doctor, this is probably 10 years ago or so, and that Indiana reservoir that was built, we were talking about a potential revision to that or a complication that I was having. And just sort of in the course of conversation, I asked that doctor, how long do these last? That doctor looked at me and said, well, when yours fails, we'll know. And that is not comforting, also.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's again, it's that same idea of being at the forefront of something is kind of cool, but it's very sort of uncomforting to know that there aren't case studies that precede you. There isn't like a playbook for how to treat you, and that you are sort of you're a trial, right? And they hope that what they're suggesting based on other things that they've seen will be helpful and will work. The silver lining in that, I guess, is that you're paying it forward for, I mean, there's
Hmm.
some 15-year-old right now who might need that same surgery, who I can tell you for certainty will have a different variation on that surgery because they've learned a few things about like ideal placement in the abdominal cavity and things of that nature, how to be less disruptive to other organs and other processes. They don't do that surgery now the way that they did it then, which is complicated for me, because some of those things are unideal, but you helped make something easier for somebody else. So that's a win, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think it kind of helps to add some perspective to it. I think Like, the challenge in medicine is that we want to get to the place where we can help folks be healthier, live longer, and I think of some, like, the genetic conditions that I've worked with and some folks that have had things like cystic fibrosis and other conditions, is that we're doing that, we're succeeding, but then we also don't necessarily know what does that look like, because for folks with some of these, we haven't had them historically, maybe hadn't made it to a certain age or had these types of things, because we are getting better with technology, we are getting better with medicine. But then that also just brings on additional challenges and things that we need to figure out and better understand.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yeah. What would you want, like, healthcare providers to know in terms of, like, working with patients that come to them that maybe either have multiple diagnoses, like different types of things going on that may not be related at all, or something that is like an unusual presentation? So somebody, again, that might be a patient zero, what would you want the healthcare providers to understand about that?
I That's an awesome question, and I wish I had spent some more time thinking about that before you asked it to me. I will say this, and this isn't a direct answer to that question, but I guess it's related. My wife was sharing with me just the other day this study that I think is fascinating, that she said that when a patient goes in to talk to a doctor, that if a doctor comes in and says, "Tell me what's going on," if the
Mhm.
patient is allowed to speak for more than 20 seconds, that there is a noticeable difference in how that patient feels in relation to how that appointment goes. If they are immediately cut off by the doctor, if they start talking and the doctor like picks up on the first thing that they say and runs down an alley and starts, diagnosing or prescribing or,
Mhm.
whatever, imposing their own narrative, that the patient feels disregarded or dismissed or not heard or whatever. And that creates a perception, in their mind. And I, the degree to which our thoughts and perceptions are a layer, an impact on how we feel,
Mhm.
not just in terms about the care we get, but about how we feel physically and how that manifests in our overall health is massive. And so for doctors, I guess I would say, um, to whatever degree you're capable, bedside manner is a huge thing. I've met so many doctors, and
Mhm.
most of them are great. A few of them are like, man, it's a good thing that guy's an awesome surgeon because his bedside manner is terrible. But I guess I would tell doctors, to whatever degree to whatever degree they're capable, to be patient, to listen to patients as they try to accurately describe as best they can how they're feeling, what's going on, because that's the best information you're going to get to work with, is how the patient is actually feeling. Sometimes that's really hard to articulate, and it's very hard to be patient with a patient. But I guess that's one thing that I would say. The whole patient zero thing is, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you can't really tell anybody anything. I mean, it is what it is. You being honest is in everyone's best interest too. I mean, it doesn't help at all to fake it. Doesn't really help to put on like a brave face and tell somebody that you're not in pain, or that something
Right.
isn't a problem, or that you're not having difficulties or whatever. And that goes for your physical health, your mental health, for everything, everything in life. Being honest as a communicator and being open as a listener, whether you're in medicine or anything, I mean, that's true for parents, for, teachers, for everybody. I would say those are hugely helpful.
Mhm. And I would ask about kind of some insight or thoughts that you would share if somebody themselves had spina bifida or had a child with spina bifida. What are some of the things that you would share with those folks?
Lean into community. There are support groups, there are peer groups. There's a lot of research. There's more research now than ever before. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to seek out other people who have been in your shoes before you, and then be open to other people's experiences, because you're not likely to have the exact same experience as somebody else, but something that's happened to somebody else may be helpful in your experience now or in the future.
And I know we've covered a few different things, and I appreciate what you said too in the last couple questions, kind of some takeaways or things for folks to remember. Is there anything else that you just want listeners to remember about this conversation?
I think it's awesome that you're doing what you're doing. And from a resource perspective, I mean, these conversations are super helpful. When you reached out to see if I would be interested in having a conversation, didn't um I didn't know exactly what you were doing and how it might be helpful. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's how we learn, right? And so if there's one person that sees this conversation, whether it's a provider or a patient or the parent of a patient or whomever, I mean, if there's one person that sees this and catches one piece of information or one insight or one perspective that's different than what they had before, then they're better off. And 30 minutes or an hour could be life changing for somebody's entire existence. So thank you for doing what you're doing and for providing a platform.
No, no, and thank you. And I appreciate you saying that. I think it helps to have talk to somebody who's written some books and know kind of how sometimes you're planting the seed and how it can kind of go out into the world maybe and then come back. So that's definitely encouraging to hear. And I do appreciate you coming on, sharing your story, talking with us today. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all the episodes of the show. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. All Access DNA is an independent podcast hosted and produced by me, Kate Wilson. Designs by NKJ created the logo. Thanks for listening and join us next time.